Welcome back to the McCann Dogs Podcast, Season 3, Episode 9, and Robbie and I are here and feeling fine. And that is a perfect rhyme, and we do it all the time.
Wow, you're good, Shannon.
I took it to another level there. Today, Robbie and I are here in the podcast studio, and we have a few things to talk about today. We're going to record a few podcasts, and one of them, we wanted to talk about what I call the sniff walk and clarify some of the ideas surrounding taking your dog for a walk and should you let them sniff, should you make them heel with you with rapt attention, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm here to tell you that you can have the best of both worlds. You can have a dog who knows how to heel nicely with you when you need that sort of attention, if there's distractions, etc. And you can have a dog that you're allowed to, or you're able to say, okay, and let them have some freedom, knowing that you will be able to get them back under control if you need to by just teaching a few skills. So today, we are talking about the sniff walk. So, Robbie, would you agree with that? Is it possible to have the best of both worlds?
Absolutely, it is. And we want to have the best of both worlds because we want our dogs to be able to enjoy their life with us. And, a lot of people think that when they teach their dog to walk, that they have to teach the dog to walk in one certain style, and that is it. That's like the hard and fast rule. And when it comes to training dogs, we need to be open to teaching them a variety of different skills. And, with walking, there's so many different styles of walking we can teach our dogs.
Absolutely. And dogs are brilliant. They really are extremely intelligent creatures. They are capable of learning all sorts of different things. We do not have to limit ourselves to one specific thing for our dogs to be able to understand how to walk nicely on a loose lead. We can have dogs that walk nicely on that loose lead, walk nicely off a lead. We can have dogs that heel with rapt attention or walk nicely at our side with a little bit less attention if we're a bit casual. There's all sorts of ways to help your dog enjoy their life and to help you be able to fit them into your life on a day-to-day basis. So, okay, let's get right into this. Tell me if you're walking down the street. So your lifestyle, you live a little bit outside of city center. So do you spend any time on sidewalks with your dogs?
I do not, because we do not have sidewalks in the area that I live. It's either walk on the side of the road and risk your life, or don't walk. So I don't walk in a neighborhood just because that's not an option for me.
Okay. So where do you walk your dogs?
If I'm going to walk my dogs, I'm going to bring them to the park. So we have a couple of beautiful parks in the city that I live in. And I bring my dogs there regularly. They go for walks there almost every single day, actually.
Okay. Nice. And tell me a little bit about the situation. What does it look like? You get to the park and...
So I get to the park, and the way our parks are set up, we have these beautiful walking paths that are paved, and so they're very well kept. And they basically weave and wind their way through the park. And so for the most part, when I'm walking at the park, I'm walking on the walking paths just because it's always nice and clean. I don't have to worry about any debris that's out, hidden in the grass somewhere with all of the dangerous things that are out there these days. So we basically will follow the path with our dogs. And when we're out there walking, for the most part, I want my dogs to enjoy their time. I want them to be allowed to wander around and sniff and check things out. And so I'll allow them to walk basically wherever they want to walk around me, provided they're not pulling me on the leash.
Perfect. I love that. Let's dive a little bit more into that. So we call that leash respect at McCann's, and we actually teach the dogs to have good leash respect, meaning that exactly what Robbie just said, your dog can be anywhere within the confines of that leash as long as they are maintaining a loose lead. And the way we teach that is by making it the dog's responsibility. We make it up to the dog to recognize that the leash is starting to tighten. We make it up to the dog to take that opportunity to loosen the leash. And we don't just expect it out of the blue. We actually spend some time teaching our dogs in a nice positive fashion and with a little bit of saying, you must, oops, I got you. We teach our dogs to be very mindful of that leash. We're always looking for ways to have fun with our dogs. We're always looking for ways to help them understand with games and trained skills. We never want to just expect our dogs to understand what we're looking for. We take the time to actually teach with drills for leash respect and whatnot. And our dogs learn to really love taking the responsibility, keeping that leash loose, and they become very, very good at it with a little bit of consistent information. So where else would you use leash respect?
I would use leash respect when I'm, for example, leaving my house and I'm heading out to walk to the vehicle. Now, for the most part, my dogs, they're older now and they're trained, and I rarely have them on a leash to walk to the vehicle at this stage of the game. But when they're young, and they have unreliable listening skills, I'm certainly not going to take a chance that they're not going to suddenly run out onto the road chasing the squirrel or the neighbor's cat. So I'll have my dogs at that stage on leash just as their safety net, and I'll expect them show leash respect as we're walking from the front door to the vehicle. So I'm not looking for a heel. It's impractical as I'm walking across my deck and I'm going down the stairs and then walking across my walkway and into my driveway and around the vehicles. I'll just have them show leash respect. Walk where you want around me, but don't try to drag me to the car. Don't try to drag me out onto the lawn to sniff something. Just hang in with me on a nice loose leash.
Perfect. And it's such a nice practical skill to have. And I always talk about having stationary leash respect as well.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we're out there and I'm not sure how close your neighbors are, but I'm sure you get moments where you stop and chat with your neighbors, et cetera, or maybe somebody at the park that you're stopping to have a little conversation with. And the last thing we want is to be, trying to dig our feet in while our dogs are dragging us off to the side. So having stationary leash respect is a wonderful thing as well. And again, another skill that we teach, which is a really nice thing to be able to call on and to be able to just always expect that the dog is going to keep that leash loose. Very nice. There is all sorts of variety in heeling exercises. And even with my own dogs, I have heeling where I will have them heeling on trails, which is very loose heeling. They don't need to look at me. They don't need to have their head up. They just need to be aware of me, and they need to be close enough to me that that they'll pay attention. If I stop walking or if I change direction or something like that, they'll pay attention and they'll move with me. So that sort of loosens the criteria of my heel on trails. It's a little bit tighter for me when I'm on sidewalks, and I do some sidewalk walking with my dogs. I actually walk my dogs a lot. If I had to tell you the main reason that I have dogs, it's for the walk. I absolutely love walking my dogs. So we do a lot of city walking. We do a lot of trail walking. We do a lot of walking in all sorts of different areas, and I like to have different criteria in those different spaces. Now, in terms of watching a really pretty picture of a dog heeling beautifully beside you, where might you use that?
Competition obedience.
That's about right.
Pretty much the only place that comes to mind where I would expect my dog to walk in perfect position at my side without taking their eyes off of me. It looks beautiful. It's such an amazing thing, and I love heeling. For me, it's one of those exercises that just shows teamwork between the dog and the handler. It gives me goosebumps to watch a really great team.
Me too.
But as much as it's a lovely thing to watch, it's just not practical in everyday life.
No, it's not. And it wouldn't be fun for us to have that expectation of our dogs out there on the street heeling with rapt attention and perfect position. Absolutely. It's work for you. It's work for the dog. It's fun for competition, but not fun for out there on the street. So if you were out there on a city sidewalk walk with your dog, what would your expectation be?
So if I was on a city sidewalk and there was not much traffic and there were no people around, I would allow my dogs the freedom of the leash respect where they can walk around me. But if I was in a more confined space, or if I'm walking at the park even, I think about those situations. I'll be walking at the park and inevitably I'm going to pass all sorts of different distractions, people jogging, people out walking other dogs, people pushing strollers, we got kids on skateboards, people flying by on bikes. There's a million different distractions, and it's great for the dog. It's great for life experience. But as soon as I see those distractions heading in my direction, then I want more control of my dogs. And that's the time I'm going to tell them to get in, which is their command to come to my side. And then I'm going to just tell them, let's go, which is kind of like an informal heel where they're now just walking nicely beside me on a loose leash, but I'm not expecting them to stare at me. I want them to be able to see the distraction that's passing by. I want them to be aware of it. I don't want them to be startled by a bike coming flying up behind us because they're feeling that they have to stare at me while they're walking.
Yeah,
so I want them to have that opportunity to look around, see what's going on around them, but still be mindful of me and be aware of where I'm going so they're able to hang in beside me nicely.
Perfect. I love that. I'm very similar mindset. I can't think of many times that I use competition style heeling out there in the real world. Maybe if I was passing some really tough distractions, something, maybe if I was walking down the sidewalk and there was nowhere else for me to go and there was, somebody coming with a skateboard or something like that. I just want to make sure that I have absolute control of my dog. Usually I'll step off to the side, but say in this fictitious situation, I can't. That's where I would bring my arm up into my stomach, which is a sign for my dog. It's a cue for my dog that I'm going into formal healing mode. And I would expect better position, better attention. But as soon as I was past that distraction, I would release that. I would say, okay, drop my arm and let them sort of decompress back out of that position. So I might use it for tight control for very short periods of time. But aside from that, outside of training for obedience and getting into the ring for obedience competition, I can't think of many other situations I would use heel. I do field work with my dogs, and my field healing is very similar to what I call my trail healing. When I'm off the beaten path, and we're out there in the bush or something like that. I have a path that I walk that's really close to my house, and it's sort of in an off-road area in a low-lying area surrounded by industrial stuff. So it's like a little forest inside of the city. And I love it. And there's a really nice path that I take along there and whatnot. And sometimes if we're going through an area that it comes close to the road where there's traffic, et cetera, sort of, it's a really neat area because you're in the forest and then all of a sudden you're beside the road again, and beside very busy roads. So there are times where I will tell Ned, get in, and I'll heal him past those roads. And that's my trail healing, where he just has to be close enough to be aware of me and change direction should I, but he's not necessarily expected to give me any sort of real rapt attention or anything of that nature. And it's an easy transition. I really like working on the transitions in my training. So talk to me, Robbie, about how do you teach if you're, for example, you go to the park and there's nobody there and you decide to let your dogs have a little off-leash romp, and now somebody comes to the park. Tell me what that looks like to you.
Yeah. So if I'm, technically at the parks in the city that I live in, we are not supposed to have our dogs off leash, but I won't lie. There will be times when there is no one around where I'll just drop their leash. I don't necessarily take it off. Not that I couldn't, but I like to just have it on them. And plus my dogs think it's great fun to grab their leash and run around and play with the leash in their mouth, which I allow because I know when I tell them to drop it, it's a non-issue for them. But
hang on, let's talk about that for a second, because I think that's a really, really important point to make.
Sure.
And we talk about how life is about balance, and having that balance allows you to say things like that, right? It allows you to say, I can let my dogs play with their leash in their mouth because. So tell me a little bit about that balance.
Yeah, my dogs love to tug, and I do a lot of tugging with them as puppies, so they think it's great fun. So naturally, they love to tug as a reward. So quite often, as part of my reward system for walking, it's not always about food. In fact, in a lot of cases, it's not about food as a reward for walking. What I'll do is when my dogs are walking nicely with me, I'll mark with my yes, let them know that I'm pleased with that behavior, and then I'll release them and I'll tell them, get it, which is their permission to grab the leash and now start tugging and playing. And it's great because now they can have fun. I have the leash, which is basically a reward for the dog. But then as soon as I need control back, all I have to do is just tell them, out, which is their command to drop it, and then they leave it, and then that's it. They don't grab it again until I invite them to do so. So I can give them that, the opportunity to have fun and tug on their leash, and it's great because I always have a leash with me, so I always have a great way of rewarding my dogs.
This is a fabulous thing to talk about because we do talk a lot about training with treats. And we don't necessarily get to the stage in our podcast or in our videos where we're talking about the weaning off of the treats. We're talking about the end part of the process because we're so heavily talking about the training aspect of things. But it's so important to have other rewards that you can replace that food with. So people often say, I don't want to have to carry food around for the rest of my life. And we don't either. No, I don't always want to have food on me because I don't mind having food on me all the time. I should qualify this. I don't mind having food on me so that I can reward my dogs when good things happen and I love what they do, but I don't want to have to. That is the caveat for me. I don't want to be reliant on food. I need to make sure that I can get a response to whatever I want without food. And then if food comes, it's a bonus, right? If the paycheck comes, it's a bonus for the dog in terms of food, but there's always some sort of paycheck. So whether it is the dog running towards you with a game that you love playing all the time, for example, I'll call Ned to me. He comes running to me and does a loop through my legs and then back around my left side. And I tell him go. And then he heads out 1,000,000 miles an hour after doing that. He loves it. He thinks it's great fun. He loves butt scratches. He loves anything water. A lot of the times I'll bring a ball with us on the trail and I'll let him carry it because he's a retriever. So he loves to have things in his mouth. Yep. It actually helps to strengthen his hold work because he gets all sorts of practice going up and down and in and through and, just being a wild little dog on the trail with this ball in his mouth and getting used to holding it gently but firmly. So it helps out with field work. It gives him lots of opportunity to practice that. But basically with that ball in his mouth, he's got his reward already. He loves that ball. It's his favorite thing in the world. But now the ball can be an option for motion. So I'll call him to me, and as a reward for calling him to me when he comes, he drops the ball and I kick it for him a couple of times. So here's a reward that we have that I don't really need to worry about. He's got it. It's his. It's on the trail. He's the one carrying it. He usually does come home with them too. He's the one carrying it. And then I get to make it a party with it, have that other reward. So having other rewards like that leash tug, but something that you can control, right? Obviously, we don't want our dogs grabbing the leash if we're trying to walk nicely with them down the street. We don't want that unbridled enthusiasm grabbing the leash. But
it's about balance.
Exactly. So we have that under stimulus control or on cue, and we can say, yes, you can get your leash and play with it now. Oh, no, now is not the appropriate time. Drop that. So that's awesome. I think that's great. We got off track a little bit.
We did.
So we were talking a lot.
We're famous for that, though.
We got off track a lot. But you know what? I think that was a really good thing to talk about. So we were talking about the transition.
Right.
So we're talking about you're at the park and So and Sprite are off leash and now you want to gain control again. So you use that get in. So what are some of the things that you do to train that get in or teach them to want to drive quickly to you? I think the leash grabbing is one of them.
Yeah. So something that we would teach as a totally separate exercise. I wouldn't go and teach that at the park. I teach that as a skill at home where there's no distraction. I can help show them what to do.
We're going to get off track again here because I think you need to elaborate on that because it's so important.
Yeah, I'll be brief about it. So I teach them at home to get into position at my side and I make it rewarding for them. So I'll use a food lure, bring them to my side, reward them heavily for it. Once they understand how to fall into position at my side on the get in command, then I'll use other rewards. I'll tell them get in. Sometimes as soon as they're in position, I'll mark yes, tell them get it. They can tug on their leash. Other times I'll say yes, ask them to tap my hand because they think that's a great game as well. Just popping up and tapping their nose on my hand for them is a wonderful game. So I'll just make it fun for them to fall into position. So if I'm out at the park, they're running loose, they've got their leash in their mouth, they're tugging, they're partying, and suddenly I see, someone coming down the path, or I see, the park people and I know I'm going to be in trouble, then I'm going to call my dogs back to me right away. And, and the great thing is they listen. They come right back to me. I tell them to get in if I want them in position at my side, or I just call them to me. And it's quite great because when they're carrying their leash and I put my hand out, they'll actually jump and they'll stick their leash right in my hand as if to say, grab the leash and play tug with me. And so it's really rewarding for them to come flying back to me.
That's awesome.
And then they say, grab the leash, I'll play a little tug, and then I'll tell them out, get them right back under control. And then it's nice too, because I want the people that we're approaching to see that my dogs are under control. I know for me, when I see loose dogs at the park, I start to panic wondering, what's going to happen here? Yeah. And I don't want to put other people in that position. If they see my dogs loose, I want that person to know I have good control over my dog. You don't need to worry. I'm calling them right back, getting them back under control, tell them to get in, let's go if I need to, and they're back in position.
Absolutely. I can't express how much I love it when you see somebody else on the trail with a dog and both people go, oh, there's another dog, and they call their dogs back. I tell Ned to get in and we heel past. And sometimes I just want to reach out and give that person a big high five because I think what a nice experience for both of us. We're both out here walking our dogs and neither of us had to go through that scenario of a dog running up and somebody yelling, it's okay, he's friendly, when they can't call their, exuberant dog back. And we've talked a lot about how we do not allow our dogs to socialize with dogs we don't know. And it's really, a lot of the times, it's very unfair for the dog that's on leash or under control to have a dog approach them with no semblance of control. So it can be really taxing. So before you take that leash off, really ask yourself, do I have control? If my dog starts chasing a squirrel, Am I going to be able to get them back? Actually, I just
Mhm.
called Ned off of a bunny on the trail the other day in full flight mode. Usually they cross the path and he'll see them and dart after them, but he stops motion very quickly at the sides of the path. Of course, I have trained for all sorts of these situations. I train a lot of setups so that when I'm out there in the real world test is not the first time I'm putting my skills to the test. I
Mhm.
know full
Mhm.
well that I can call my dog off moving bikes and skateboards, and I can call them off of toys that I've been playing with and moving around to look like prey in motion, etc. So anyways, this bunny decided that it was going to take the trail, and Ned ran in hot pursuit after that bunny, and I was so grateful in that moment. And he got lots and lots of partying. I had his ball, I had his butt scratches, I had some cheese in my pocket too that I had just happened to have in my pocket. He got the biggest jackpot reward for coming off of that bunny in the real world. But I'll tell you, that definitely wasn't the first time that we have practiced calling him off of swift moving objects. And until I felt really confident that I could, I would never take the leash off it. There's too much room for unfortunate things to happen. So
Absolutely. One deer runs off, the dog
Absolutely.
follows, and they're gone.
yeah, we all remember Fenton.
Fenton,
Hopefully we
yeah.
don't have those big herds that we need to concern ourselves with surprise us, but the occasional bunny or deer definitely does surprise you if you're out there. So, are there any other? So we sort of started getting to off-leash control. So let's talk about what other skills you have that you use in terms of controlling your dogs, random commands, things like that. What comes to mind?
First thing that comes to mind is response to name.
Beautiful. Love it. Tell me about it.
Yeah. I want to make sure that when I call my dog's name, they turn, check in with me, and think about heading in my direction immediately. I want to make sure that I can call them back. And I don't, I will admit, my dogs don't really know a come command. And that's only because I've never actually taught them a formal come command. I tend to use response to name because I have multiple dogs. And I don't necessarily want them, if I have several dogs, I don't want them all necessarily coming. So I'll call them by name. And that's what I work on the most. I start that when they're baby puppies. I teach them that responding to their name is the best thing ever. But then I'm very careful about how I use their name in everyday life because it's so easy to water down that response by using it in situations where you're not getting a response, or in using it in situations where the dog doesn't really know what it means. And we see so many students who think that their dog just knows what their name is magically. It's their name. Why wouldn't they know it? It's a command basically that we have to teach them. And it takes time, if you want to teach it right. If you're looking for that quick response, regardless of the distraction or the situation, it takes time to teach a really solid response.
Absolutely. And so much of what your dog does is about the expectations you have. So if you expect your dog to turn and recall to you on their name, you will get there. If you think, oh, that's too much work, then you won't. And same thing with any of our commands. It really is such an important thing to put the time in, put the effort in, and teach your dogs. And we cannot express enough how important it is to make sure that you've taught these things before you actually need them. The first time your dog hears come should not be when they're chasing that bunny, because I guarantee you it will not
happen.
It will not work at that point. But Ned did great. I was thrilled with that one. Full bore running after that bunny.
Good boy, Ned.
Yep. He's a good dog. So, but it allows me to be confident going off on trails. I walk that trail now every morning, and it's the start to my day, and I want to be able to relax in that situation. I want to know that nothing is going to come up that's going to be, there's coyotes out there on the trail all the time. I don't see them on that trail. It's a little bit too off-road, but I see scat all the time out there. There's lots of beaver activity. There's trees down all the time and beaver dams along there. Gobs of bunnies. Oh my gosh, the bunnies are all over the place. Yeah. And I want to make sure that my bases are covered, and I'm going to go home with my dog if I do take that leash off. So it's so important to do all of the work. And some of those things, so my point, some of those things are random commands that I rely on as well. And do you use random commands with your dogs? Tell me what a random command is.
So random command, first thing that comes to mind are commands like sit and down. And when we use a random command, we're looking for an immediate response wherever the dog happens to be. And for example, if my dogs are, 20 feet down the path and they're, running around, and I say to them, lie down, I expect them to immediately stop where they are and drop to the ground. Or if I was to say to them, sit, I would expect them to stop and sit. What some dogs do, some dogs just totally ignore it and don't listen at all. Other dogs think they have to come all the way back to us and then do the sit or the down. And we're looking for an instant response. Sit or down, boom, the dog's in action within a second, doing what they're told to do. So that's what we would consider a random command.
Perfect. And it makes sense that the dog would potentially orient themselves to the handler before doing the behavior, because the handler has the rewards. So they're thinking, I need to get to you. I need to get closer to you to get that reward. So we actually spend time when we teach random commands, we spend a lot of time teaching the dog how to stop in motion and how to sit or down. And those commands come in so handy. I use those a lot on trails. The trail that I was just talking about, it's very windy, as I mentioned. And a lot of the times when Ned gets to a certain wind in the road, he'll go out of sight if I don't stop his motion. So I have 3 commands that I can use on trail at that point. I can just tell him wait, which basically just means stop motion. Do whatever you're doing, but stop motion. You can sniff around that area. I just don't want you moving further away or coming back to me. Just hang on for a second. And that gives me time to catch up with him. I can also rely on a random sit, and I can rely on a random down. I will mix those up. I don't necessarily have a preference. I would say if there's stimulation in the environment and I'm wanting to stop motion because of chase potential, I would probably use the sit or the down. The down, of course, being much more solid. If, though, I just want him to hold his horses for a second, just yelling wait for my dogs is the perfect thing. And I've taught that as a very casual command. I basically just say wait, and then I'll toss a cookie when they actually stop motion and look at me and go, oh, what do you want me to wait for? And then I'll yes and throw a cookie and then tell them, okay, so that they can release. And then I'll wean away from the food, of course, as we get into the process. I really love watching Border Collies do random downs. It's such a natural thing for them to start motion quickly and stop motion quickly. So you have done some herding with your dogs, correct?
I have done some herding, yes.
Talk a little bit about the random down when it comes to herding.
Yeah, it's a very handy command, I'll tell you. When the sheep are coming in and you're thinking, I am about to get run over by a flock of sheep, and you can tell your dog, lie down, and they lie down and they take the pressure off the sheep and you don't get run over, because I will admit it has happened to me in the past when I've been training some of my dogs many, many years ago. And
there's a hazard in dog training.
It is. And the funny thing is, I think back to when that happened, and it was my very first Border Collie who was trained to a very high level of, actually the top level of competition obedience. And this dog had solid listening skills. But interestingly enough, when the stimulation of herding those sheep kicked in, and he was bringing the sheep in towards me, and I told him lie down, and he totally ignored me, kept going, the sheep kept going, I got run over, and basically the sheep went, the dog went with them, and I'm on the ground. And it was it was one of those situations where I think back and I can laugh now, but I wasn't laughing at the time when I was getting run over by a herd of sheep.
Oh my goodness.
But so even though he had a great random down, in all other situations, we really had to work it when we were doing the sheep herding. But it's so important to be able to control the dog. And, and he got better and better as we practiced more and more. But it was a bit of a challenge in the beginning, I will admit.
Yeah, it is absolutely amazing what happens to their brains when their instinctual bodies kick in and when they're following the prey drives that are guiding their behavior, et cetera. I mean, if you think about it for a second, from a logical perspective, it makes so much sense. Because if they were in prey mode and they were chasing down something for dinner and they were able to be distracted by squirrel as they were running after the sheep for dinner, they wouldn't eat. So it makes sense that everything in their body channels towards that prey behavior. So if you expect the dog to be able to listen with the prey drive pumping, you need to have opportunities to train them to listen when they're in prey drive mode. And it's really interesting that that we're getting to this point, I think, because I actually love, I have several videos on my phone of Ned after he's chased a bunny off the side of the trail and I've called him back and he'll be in that prey drive mode. And his body language is just completely different and it fascinates me so much. His back legs start going out in all sorts of different directions because his front end is zigzagging instead of just casually sniffing, and there's an entirely different switch that happens in his body. And I've said on the podcast before, I look for those opportunities as much as possible to start throwing commands at the dog. And again, this wouldn't be happening when they were in young dog training mode.
Right.
At that point, I've still got a long line on. I've still got my fail safes in place. There's no way they could possibly get away, etc. And I'm introducing or I'm helping to bring along random commands in a much more quiet fashion, but eventually bringing them to the trail point. But now with Ned, for example, he's 5. He just turned 5 recently. And every time I see him going into that prey drive mode, I'm in training mode now all of a sudden, and I'm working on my random commands because I know that is a really hard time for him to listen, and it takes breakthrough skills and for me to truly empathize with this dog and not think he's being stubborn because in that moment when he's in prey drive, he's not listening to me and he knows how to listen. I know it's far bigger than that. I know that there are physical changes that are happening in his body and his psyche to keep him in prey mode and keep him fed instead of, not being able to catch food and be done. And of course, I think that there's a lot to be said as well for the fact that our dogs are not hungry. So usually when they're in prey mode, it's even less than it would be if they were actually a hungry animal thinking that they needed to actually feed themselves. So
For sure.
I think we definitely did digress on that one. But I think it's important to note about ongoing training that using these modes and training when they're in drive and when they're in stimulated mode is going to really serve you well. So can you think of any situations that you will train random commands and train good listening skills while your dogs are really high?
For sure. So I do a lot of retrieving stuff with my dogs. Nothing formal, but I'll do a lot of disc work with them. They love to chase toys. They love their tuggy toys. And so I'll purposely do things like throw their Frisbee. And while they're in full flight after their Frisbee, I'll throw in a random command, lie down.
Love it.
And I expect them to hit the deck. Yep, the Frisbee's going, but I told you to lie down and I expect that lie down. And then what I'll often do is the moment they lie down, I'll, release them right away. So I don't expect them necessarily to lie down for a long period of time, but I want to make sure that I'm checking them in. Are you listening to me even though you're in that high drive state?
Amazing.
Or
I love it.
sometimes I'll have them sit and wait, or I'll have them lie down and wait, and I'll run away dragging a toy, and then I'll release them to me. And as they're running full steam towards me, I'll tell them lie down. I rarely work a sit in that situation because it is a little harder for them to stop and sit. Not that I wouldn't expect them to, I would, but I'm trying to make it a little easier for them. And I throw in that random down. With being border collies, they're pretty darn good at a random down and fast motion. But I try to look for those opportunities when they're stimulated and excited. Or, when my dogs are running and playing, they love to run and play with one another. Even, the situations where they're at the park and they've got their leash in their mouth and they're running around and chasing each other and barking. I'll sometimes just tell them, lie down, and I expect them to both hit the deck, lie there until I say to them, okay, and they'll lie there and they'll stare at me and they'll stare at me and they'll stare at me thinking, when are you going to release me? When are you going to release me? And then boom, okay, I release them and the game starts all over again. So it's fun.
Absolutely.
But they're listening.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is that the release itself becomes this giant reward.
Absolutely.
So then the value gets transferred to the actual random down itself because the random down becomes the predictor of the release. So you can have all sorts of really non-intuitive rewards for your dogs that are not food, that are not toys, that are still reinforcing, that are still going to help them want to listen. And with those random commands, I will do a lot of work as well on my random get in. So making sure that my dog, wherever he is, if I yell get in, he's orienting back to my side to get into heel position, lickety splits. So I think that those are really, really good things to practice. On that note, I think that this has been a really good episode for talking about how you can have the best of all worlds. We definitely had more than 2 worlds in there. So a little bit of balance, absolutely. And a lot of balance goes a long way, helping your dog have the absolute best life. We are actually talking about the random sit as our monthly members only, our life skills monthly members only topic this month, so that we can start to work in some more random control for our students. And on that note, if you are looking for personalized training and feedback, join Robbie and I online in the McCann Dogs Homeschool. We have programs for before you get your puppy. We have programs for your puppy's actual arrival, coming home with our Puppy Essentials program. And then we have a life skills program that teaches all of the continued obedience, come, heel, stay. And there's so much more to it as well. You get all sorts of great advice, answers to your questions, and a structured program to help work you through. And then past that, we have ongoing higher learning in our Life Skills Monthly members, which teaches all sorts of concepts like what we were just talking about. So if you would like more help with your dog, check out what we have to offer in the McCann Dogs Homeschool. And on that note, I'm Instructor Shannon.
I'm Instructor Robbie.
Happy training.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the McCann Dogs podcast. And if you'd like some more training resources, be sure to check us out on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook at McCann Dogs. And if you'd like to train with us online, be sure to check out the show notes below for our My Dog Can online training program, where we know in just a few weeks your dog will become a well-behaved family member. Until then, happy training.